The scraping sound still haunts me, a slow, grinding drag across concrete, like someone pulling dead weight through gravel. I looked out the front window and froze. My heart didn't skip a beat. It plummeted. There, in broad daylight, stood Karen Whitmore, the self-declared queen of our HOA, with her gloved hands gripping the handles of my daughter's wheelchair. My daughter's wheelchair. The same one Lila had used every single day since the accident that took her ability to walk. Karen was dragging it. No, hauling it toward the green dumpster stationed at the end of the block. Her face was calm, cold, completely unbothered, like she was just taking out the trash. My voice caught in my throat as I flung open the door and stumbled onto the porch. "Stop! What are you doing?" I shouted, but she didn't turn around, didn't flinch. She just kept dragging it. The rubber wheels bounced over the sidewalk, and the metal frame let out a painful screech as it scraped a crack in the pavement. Behind me, Lila was sobbing softly from the hallway, confused and terrified. She'd seen it too, her chair, her lifeline to the outside world, being treated like garbage. I sprinted across the lawn, nearly tripping over the sprinkler head. I grabbed the wheelchair frame just before Karen could lift it into the dumpster. "This is my daughter's mobility aid. This isn't curb clutter." I screamed. Karen finally turned, her expression blank, her tone clinical. "It was blocking the sidewalk," she said coolly. "According to HOA regulations, unattended equipment on shared property can be removed after 48 hours. This is day 3. My hands trembled. She sat there for 20 minutes while I was cleaning up after her seizure. "She can't be in the sun too long." I brought her in and came back out, and my words fell apart in my throat. She didn't care. She wasn't listening. She had already turned around and walked away, her manicured nails adjusting her sunglasses like nothing had happened. Neighbors peeked from their windows, but no one came out. Not one soul. Just a few blinds moving back into place. Just silence and the distant hum of a lawnmower. I stood there holding the wheelchair, stunned and shaking, my palms sweaty on the handles. I could smell the sour stench of trash wafting from the dumpster, and the smell clung to the chair like it had absorbed Karen's cruelty. Lila's name was still written in colorful glitter letters on the backrest, a craft she'd done on her birthday, when she was so proud to finally have her own ride. And now, it had almost ended up in the garbage. That night, Lila barely spoke. She sat on the couch, clutching her stuffed penguin, rocking gently. She didn't even ask for her favorite show or bedtime story. She just kept whispering, "Why did she throw it away? Did I do something wrong?" I held her tight, promising her that no one could take away her dignity. But deep down, something inside me had shattered, and something else had ignited. Rage, yes, but more than that, a resolve. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a wheelchair. This was about control. This was about someone who thought they had the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't, who's welcome and who's clutter. And my daughter, my brilliant, brave, wheelchair-bound little girl, was being treated like a problem to be cleaned up. So I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to write another polite email to the HOA board. I wasn't going to let another fake smile gaslight me into silence. No, I was going to expose the truth. I was going to make sure everyone saw what Karen did and what the HOA allowed. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. And I was ready to fight for it. But I had no idea just how far they were willing to go to silence me. And I had no idea that this battle would end in front of a packed courtroom, a hidden video, and a tearful confession that would make headlines across the country. This is the story of how one HOA crossed the line and how one mother stood her ground. We moved to Willow Creek for peace, or at least, that's what I told myself while taping up the last cardboard box labeled Lila's books. I had spent months researching neighborhoods. I wanted somewhere quiet, clean, and safe. A place where my daughter could recover. A place where the world wouldn't look at her like she was broken. Willow Creek looked perfect on paper. Tree-lined streets, smiling families, sparkling sidewalks, and the crown jewel of suburban living, a well-organized homeowners association. Back then, I thought that meant security. I thought rules meant fairness. I was wrong. But in the beginning, it felt like a fresh start. Our new home sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, just one story but with wide doorways and a sloped ramp leading up to the porch, Lila's favorite part. It's like a castle drawbridge. She'd squealed the day we moved in, rolling herself up it with confidence that took my breath away. She'd come so far since the accident. The accident. That day still plays in my mind like a broken reel. A careless driver, a distracted moment, a crosswalk, ignored. Lila had only been 7. Her spine was shattered. Doctors weren't sure she'd survive. But she did, stronger, softer, quieter. She'd learned to adapt to the wheelchair better than I'd learned to watch her in it. It broke my heart how she tried to smile for my sake. So, I poured all my energy into this new chapter. I unpacked every box myself, lined her room with fairy lights, baked cookies for the neighbors. We met a few families in the first week, mostly kind, if a little distant. And then came Karen Whitmore. She appeared the same way most bad weather does, beautiful at a glance, but bringing a storm. "Hi, there." She'd chirped from across the lawn, waving like we'd been neighbors for years. Her platinum hair barely moved in the wind, and her pastel cardigan was buttoned to the top. She walked over with a clipboard in one hand and a plate of cookies in the other. "I'm Karen, president of the Willow Creek HOA. Just wanted to give you a little welcome gift and go over some of the community guidelines, of course. We like to keep things tidy around here." I thanked her and took the cookies, dry shortbread like her smile. Lila peeked out from behind my legs. Karen knelt down, made eye contact, and spoke with the forced sweetness of a school principal. "Hello, sweetheart. Aren't you just the cutest little thing?" Lila whispered a soft, "Hi," and rolled back indoors. Karen stood up without blinking. "She's special, huh?" she said, her tone unreadable. I forced a smile. "She's brilliant. Loves painting and space documentaries. I can barely keep up." Karen's mouth twitched. "Lovely. Well, let us know if you need anything. And just remember, no permanent fixtures in the front yard. That includes ramps, signs, and any medical items." It wasn't a direct shot, but I felt it, like a dart just grazed my skin. Still, I brushed it off. Everyone has quirks. Maybe she was just trying to maintain standards. Weeks passed. I found comfort in small routines, watering plants while Lila watched cartoons, waving at Mr. Bennett across the street, helping Lila learn to use the chair on uneven ground. She called it space training. It made me smile. The first letter came a month later. A formal HOA notice in an envelope that looked more like a bill than a welcome. It cited non-compliant ramp height and unauthorized plant pots. I was confused. The ramp had been approved by city inspectors, and the flowers were in movable pots. But the tone was cold, almost accusatory, like I'd violated something sacred. I called the HOA number. Karen answered. "Yes, we received a complaint. Sidewalk aesthetics are important for the neighborhood vibe. We just want things to feel uniform." Uniform. Like every home should look the same. Like no one should remind others that life isn't always perfect. Still, I adjusted the pots, smoothed over the conflict. Then came the stroller incident. Lila's friend Ava had come over for a playdate. Her mom brought her little brother, who was still in a stroller. They parked it on our porch temporarily, next to Lila's wheelchair. The 2 kids played with bubbles in the yard, laughing like any other children. The next morning, I found another letter taped to our door. "Excessive clutter observed on porch. Strollers, toys, and medical aids must not be left unattended." The words medical aids were underlined. I felt my chest tighten. I called Karen again, trying to be civil. "My daughter uses that chair. It's not clutter. It's her legs." Karen sighed. "We understand your situation, Emily, but please be reasonable. It's about property values. No one wants to feel like they're living near a hospital." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The call ended with her usual line, "Let's try to keep the neighborhood beautiful." I wanted to scream, "Beautiful for who?" Mr. Bennett came by later that day, holding a small potted orchid. "I heard about the letter," he said softly. "She's been like this for years. Don't take it personal. You're not the first target, but Maybe you can be the last. I didn't understand what he meant until later. At the time, I just smiled and accepted the orchid. I still watered it every week. The final straw before everything exploded happened 2 weeks later during a community block party. Karen made a point to speak loudly within earshot. It's such a shame, when people make choices that affect their children's safety. Leaving wheelchairs outside unattended, anyone could tamper with them. Her words were daggers wrapped in concern. People nodded politely, but no one objected. That's when I knew. This wasn't about rules. This wasn't about neighborhood beauty. This was about erasing what didn't fit her picture-perfect fantasy, and we were a smudge on her portrait. But I still didn't see the full extent of what she was capable of, not until the day she dragged my daughter's wheelchair to the dumpster in front of everyone. That was the moment I changed. That was the moment I decided silence was no longer an option. There's a kind of fear that doesn't scream, it simmers. It lingers like smoke in your lungs long after the fire's gone. That's what life under Karen's rule began to feel like. Not loud, not immediate, just an ever-tightening grip around our daily lives, a slow erasure of anything she couldn't control. At first, I tried to ignore it, told myself I was being paranoid, but the signs piled up, subtle, deliberate, and unmistakable. The first was the chalk drawing. Lila had spent an entire afternoon decorating the sidewalk outside our house with colorful planets. Saturn had rings made of orange and purple loops. Earth was shaped like a heart. She even wrote in uneven block letters, "My MOM is my hero." It was innocent, beautiful, even the kind of thing any parent would treasure. By morning, it was gone. Washed clean. No rain, no sprinklers. Just gone. I found a note in our mailbox. Please refrain from sidewalk markings. HOA rules prohibit any personal artwork on communal property. It was typed, no name, but I didn't need a signature to know who it was from. I sat Lila down gently and told her her artwork had been accidentally washed away. She didn't say much, just stared at the sidewalk for a long time. Later that day, I spotted Karen walking her perfectly groomed golden retriever, sipping from a stainless steel tumbler with best HOA Prez ever written on the side in rhinestones. She smiled at me and waved, the same smile a lion might give a deer just before it lunges. I nodded back, civil but cold. A new resolve was forming in me. I began documenting everything. The next incident came 3 days later. Lila had been invited to a neighborhood kid's birthday party, Ava's younger brother Jonah. The whole cul-de-sac was there. Kids played in bounce houses, parents gathered around barbecues. Lila was so excited she wore a sparkly unicorn headband and brought a handmade card. I watched from across the street as she approached the party in her chair, card clutched in her lap. Then I saw Karen intercept her at the gate. It wasn't dramatic. She leaned in close, smiled, and whispered something in Lila's ear. Lila froze. Her hands slowly placed the card on the welcome table, and without a word, she turned around and rolled back home. When she came inside, she didn't cry. She just said, quietly, "She said people might trip over me." I nearly flipped the table over. I marched over to Ava's mom, who was shocked. She hadn't seen it happen, but apologized profusely and promised to speak with Karen. I knew she wouldn't. No one ever did. Because Karen was the neighborhood. She hosted the events. She controlled the newsletter. She approved backyard fence heights and patio furniture colors. Her husband, Mark, was quiet, a dull shadow trailing behind her, and the rest of the HOA board were either clueless or complicit, especially Todd Kingsley, the HOA secretary, a man whose greatest thrill seemed to be measuring grass height with a ruler. The more I pushed back, the more Karen tightened the screws. We began receiving citations for the most absurd things. A visibly unkempt lawn, when ours was freshly mowed. Non-conforming exterior decor, which referred to a small wind chime Lila had made in art class. Obstructed view from sidewalk, pointing to the wheelchair ramp. It wasn't about rules. It was war by paper cuts. Mr. Bennett, our neighbor and a retired Army vet, saw through it all. One evening, as I wheeled Lila home from the park, he stepped onto his porch with 2 iced lemonades. He handed me one, nodded toward Karen's house, and said, "She's always needed a target. Used to be the Robinsons, they had too many garden gnomes. Then it was the Patel twins. Rollerblading was a noise violation. Now it's you. And she's not going to stop. Why don't people stand up to her?" I asked, exhausted. He took a sip, then looked me dead in the eye. "Because most people don't want to rock the boat, even if it's sailing toward a cliff. But not you. You've got a reason to fight." And I did. I started tracking every violation, printing every letter, recording every encounter. I installed a video doorbell and a small camera pointed at the porch. Not because I feared theft, but because I feared Karen. And then came the flyers. One morning, every mailbox on the block, except ours, had a pamphlet tucked inside. I found out through a neighbor who handed me theirs, unsure whether to show it. The top read, "IS Our Neighborhood Safe for Children?" Below was a blurry photo of Lila's wheelchair ramp and an out-of-context clip of her crying after a seizure. The caption read, "Unattended medical risks. Unpredictable behavior. Consider your family's safety." I couldn't breathe. I felt my knees buckle. They were painting my child as a threat. I called the HOA hotline in fury. Karen answered. As always, "Karen, this has gone too far. That flyer is slander and you know it." A pause. Then, "I don't control what concerned residents distribute. People are allowed to express opinions. That's freedom of speech. You're harassing my daughter." Another pause. "I think you're letting emotions cloud your judgment. Emily, perhaps you'd be happier in a community better suited to your family's unique needs." That was her solution. Push us out. I was done asking for decency. So, I filed a formal complaint with the city's Office of Civil Rights. I contacted an advocacy group for disability inclusion. I began recording TikToks sharing our story anonymously, and within days, they started going viral. Messages poured in. Parents who'd faced similar HOA bullies, veterans, activists, even attorneys offering help. And that's when Karen lost control. She started lurking, parking her car near our home with her phone in hand, taking pictures, complaining about online defamation to other neighbors. One night, she walked up to my porch and rang the bell. When I answered, she didn't smile. "You're creating a toxic environment," she snapped, "posting slander, turning the neighborhood against itself." I stood my ground. "You dragged a child's wheelchair into a dumpster, Karen." The toxicity started long before TikTok. She leaned closer. "This isn't over." "No," I replied. "It's just beginning." That was the last warning before she made her boldest, most public move. She waited until I was distracted, just 20 minutes inside with Lila after a mild seizure. The chair had been left near the porch, tucked safely to the side. Karen saw her opportunity. She didn't knock. She didn't call. She marched across the lawn, grabbed the chair by the handles, and began dragging it toward the street. That's where the next chapter begins. But by then, I wasn't just documenting her abuse. I was preparing to burn the whole empire of cruelty to the ground and rebuild it into something better. It was a Thursday, warm, cloudless still. One of those days when everything looks ordinary, right until it doesn't. Lila had woken up with a slight fever. Nothing serious, just the after effects of a restless night and a minor seizure. I gave her medication, wiped her forehead gently, and helped her to the porch where she liked to sit when she wasn't feeling well. She called it her space station, said she liked to pretend she was monitoring the stars from our front steps. I brought her juice, her sketch pad, and her favorite blue blanket, the one with stitched constellations. Then I stepped inside, just for a few minutes, to get her a fresh ice pack. She was never out of view for more than 5 minutes. That's all it took. When I returned to the front door, I heard it again, that sickening, scraping sound, like something metal being dragged across concrete. My eyes snapped to the driveway. My heart stopped. Karen. She was dragging Lila's empty wheelchair, both hands clenched around the handles, the wheels bumping awkwardly over the curb and catching against the cracks in the pavement. Her lips were pursed, her jaw stiff. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around. She didn't even acknowledge Lila's voice. "Mom." Lila's cry came from behind me. Her small frame leaned forward on the porch bench, trembling. Her sketch pad had fallen to the floor. Her voice cracked, confused and terrified. "Why is she taking my chair?" My body went cold. I ran. "Karen, stop!" I screamed, bursting out of the front door down the steps. My breath caught in my throat. My legs felt like jelly. The closer I got, the more surreal it felt, like a nightmare happening in slow motion. But this wasn't a dream. This was real. Karen kept walking. "Karen, that's my daughter's chair." I shouted again, louder this time. "You have no right." She didn't stop until she reached the green dumpster at the far end of the cul-de-sac, the community trash unit the HOA had placed there for bulk items. She gripped the chair harder and lifted the front wheels as if preparing to hoist it in. I reached her just in time. I slammed my hand onto the wheelchair handle and yanked it back, nearly causing her to lose her grip. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded, breathless. Karen turned slowly, her eyes cold. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. The HOA received multiple complaints. That chair was left unattended for more than 24 hours. That qualifies as curbside clutter under Section 4B. My voice trembled with fury. She was out here for 20 minutes. She's sick. I went inside to grab her medication. Karen shrugged. Intentions don't matter. Rules are rules. I could barely process the audacity. That's not clutter. That's her mobility. That's her life. You're treating her like she's disposable. Karen's tone didn't change. Then perhaps you should keep her things inside. This is a family-friendly neighborhood. We have standards. It took everything in me not to scream. My fingers curled around the wheelchair handles, holding them like they were the only thing anchoring me to sanity. Behind us, neighbors had begun to step outside. Garage doors opened. Curtains shifted. People peeked out, curious but quiet. No one intervened. No one spoke. And then Lila's voice rang out, soft, shaking, but loud enough to carry. "Why are you throwing away my chair?" Karen froze. Everyone heard it. I turned to see Lila slowly wheeling herself toward us using her backup indoor chair, struggling against the uneven sidewalk. Her blanket was still draped around her shoulders. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes glistened with tears. Karen glanced at her, then back at me. "You're making this dramatic," she muttered. I laughed bitterly. "You dragged a disabled child's wheelchair to a dumpster in front of the entire block, Karen. I think we passed dramatic 20 minutes ago." That's when Mark, her husband, arrived. He jogged over, awkwardly adjusting his tie, clearly just returning from work. He looked at the scene. The wheelchair near the dumpster, the crowd forming, Karen standing rigid. And then he saw Lila. "Karen, what is this?" he asked, clearly horrified. Karen turned sharply. "I'm enforcing regulations, Mark. This family has been violating HOA policy for weeks." Mark looked at me, then back at her. "It's a wheelchair. For a child. A sick child." Karen's lip twitched. "You're not on the board. Stay out of it." But it was too late, because Mr. Bennett had stepped forward. Quiet, steady, holding his phone. "Actually," he said calmly, "you might want to see this." He pressed play. The crowd watched a video, taken just moments before, from the porch camera I'd installed weeks ago. The footage showed Karen walking straight onto our lawn, no hesitation grabbing the chair and dragging it down the sidewalk. No pause, no knock, no emergency, just cruelty. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "That's not okay." She didn't even check with the family. "Is that even legal?" Karen stood frozen, her face slowly losing color. I turned to the crowd. My voice trembled but held steady. "My daughter has been targeted since we moved here. This isn't about rules. This is about power, about control, about someone who doesn't want disabled people ruining her version of pretty." Lila whispered, barely audible but clear, "I'm not trash." And that broke the silence. A neighbor finally stepped forward, Ava's mom. She wrapped an arm around me and nodded. "You're right. This needs to stop." Karen's facade crumbled. She backed away, stuttering. I? I was just following policy. I didn't mean, but the crowd wasn't listening anymore. They were watching Lila. She sat quietly in her backup chair, clutching her blanket, brave in her smallness. She didn't cry. She didn't hide. She looked at Karen with wide, steady eyes. Karen turned and stormed off, muttering something about lawyers and reputation. But it didn't matter, because that day something shifted. The silence broke. People began to speak up, neighbors who'd stayed quiet for too long. Stories came out. Past injustices, other families she'd bullied, files that had been buried, videos that had been ignored. And I knew this wasn't just a neighborhood issue anymore. This was going to become something bigger. The news hadn't reached the outside world yet. The media hadn't picked it up. But I'd already started preparing the emails, the footage, the legal forms, the advocacy network that was waiting for my call, because you don't just throw away a child's dignity and expect the world to look away. Not this time. Not with me watching. That night, the house was silent. Not the kind of peaceful silence you pray for after a long day, but the heavy, breathless kind that fills your lungs with cement. The kind that presses against your chest like grief you haven't named yet. Lila didn't want dinner, didn't want a movie, didn't even want her sketch pad. She lay on the couch curled beneath her blanket, eyes open but vacant. Her stuffed penguin was clutched tightly in one arm, the other hand tracing the star stitched into the blanket's edge over and over like a ritual. I sat beside her, gently brushing her hair with my fingers. Do you want to talk about it? She shook her head no. I waited, hoping she'd change her mind, but she didn't. After a long pause, she whispered, "Did I do something bad?" My heart shattered. "No, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault." But she threw away my chair. Her voice cracked on the last word, like it still didn't make sense in her mind. "That means it doesn't matter. That I don't matter." I pulled her into my arms. "You matter more than anything in the world." She was wrong, and we're going to make it right. She didn't cry. Not then. Just closed her eyes and fell asleep in my arms. But I cried, silently so she wouldn't hear. Not just out of pain, but out of anger. Anger that a grown woman could do that to a child. Anger that no one stopped her sooner. Anger at myself for thinking this neighborhood would ever be safe. And most of all, anger that this kind of cruelty was legal if it wore a blazer and carried a clipboard. By morning, the video had spread. Mr. Bennett had shared it privately with a few neighbors, and from there it rippled like a match in a drought. I began getting texts from unknown numbers. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Is there anything I can do to help?" We always felt something was off with Karen, but didn't know what to say. Too little, too late. I wasn't interested in pity. I wanted accountability. On Friday, I filed a formal harassment complaint with the city's Office of Civil Rights, citing targeted abuse against a disabled minor. I attached a 45-page PDF of evidence, HOA citations, video footage, audio recordings, screenshots of online harassment, and neighbor testimonies. I also emailed Diana Reyes, a civil rights attorney who had messaged me days earlier after one of my anonymous TikToks went viral. Within hours, she responded, "What happened to your daughter is both illegal and morally repugnant. If you're willing to fight this, I'm with you. All the way." That same day, Karen doubled down. She sent out a president's note to the neighborhood mailing list claiming an unfortunate misunderstanding had occurred involving a mobility aid, and that a concerned citizen was merely acting to uphold community safety. She painted herself as the victim, again, but this time, the narrative was slipping from her hands. Because someone, probably Mr. Bennett, leaked the full porch footage, not just the dumpster scene, but every clip from weeks before. Karen photographing our porch, Karen muttering insults while passing Lila, Karen issuing citations for chalk art. The internet did what it does best, and this time it was on our side. The story hit Reddit, then Twitter, then Facebook parenting groups, then disability rights forums. Within 48 hours, it was on BuzzFeed, Upworthy, and eventually CNN under the headline, "Wheelchair Thrown Away." Mother speaks out after HOA president targets disabled child. Karen tried to issue a statement, but it was too late. Her name trended on every platform. Comment sections exploded with rage. This woman shouldn't be near children. I hope this family sues the pants off her. She belongs in jail, not on a board. But while the internet raged, Lila stayed quiet. For days, she barely spoke more than a few words. She didn't want to leave the house, didn't want visitors. She wouldn't even wheel herself onto the porch, her space station. It was like that part of her world had been poisoned. One afternoon, I brought out her favorite constellation book and opened to her favorite page, the Orion cluster. I whispered, Orion was a warrior. Not because he fought battles, but because he kept going after being hurt. She looked up at me, her voice thin. What if I don't want to be a warrior anymore? My chest ached. I kissed her forehead. Then you rest, and I'll fight until you're ready. That night, I met with Diana over Zoom. We built our case. She said it was more than a civil matter, that we had potential grounds for a federal disability discrimination suit, especially since Karen was acting in an official capacity as HOA president. Diana recommended we file under both state and ADA protections. She also proposed a restraining order preventing Karen from coming within 50 feet of our property or contacting Lila in any way. I agreed, and while I was ready to fight with every legal tool available, I didn't expect what happened next. Because someone from within the HOA board reached out anonymously. They claimed Karen had doctored reports, intimidated board members, and rejected reasonable accommodation requests for other families over the past 2 years. They attached a folder of internal emails showing her obsession with keeping the neighborhood uniform and preserving aesthetic standards. Some of the lines were horrifying. Disabled equipment is visual noise. One sick child opens the door to a flood of special requests. Porches are for pumpkins, not pity. That was the final nail. I forwarded it to Diana. Her response, this isn't just a lawsuit anymore. This is going to make national policy waves. But while the storm gathered online and in courtrooms, inside our home the battle was quieter, more delicate. Helping Lila heal would take more than justice. It would take time, trust, and tenderness. So I focused on giving her that. I canceled unnecessary appointments, made blanket forts, read bedtime stories with all the voices, baked constellations into cookies, helped her create art again, this time safely inside, on canvas instead of sidewalks. And slowly, Lila began to return. One morning, I found her on the porch again, sketching with a colored pencil. I sat beside her. What are you drawing? She held up the paper, a simple blue figure with a cape, pushing a wheelchair. You, she said, you're my shield. I smiled, tears silently falling down my cheek. Because no matter what Karen had tried to destroy, she failed. She failed to break our family. She failed to silence our story. And soon, she would answer for everything. Something changed in me after the incident. The fear was still there, but it had hardened, not into bitterness, but into purpose. I wasn't just going to protect my daughter anymore. I was going to set a fire under everything that made what Karen did feel acceptable. And I wasn't alone. Diana Reyes was a force of nature. She didn't talk like a lawyer, she talked like a mother who had seen too many other mothers get pushed into silence. She built our case with the precision of a surgeon and the fury of a storm. This is more than an HOA dispute, she told me during one of our late-night Zoom calls. This is a public civil rights violation. They attacked your daughter's dignity. That's going to matter in court and online. By now, national attention had surged. A clip of Lila saying, "I'm not trash," had reached 12 million views on TikTok. Celebrities reposted it. Disability advocates rallied behind us. News outlets began requesting interviews. I declined most of them. I didn't want Lila exploited. But one story aired on Good Morning America, with our permission, blurring Lila's face and changing her name. Karen tried to respond with a press release claiming emotional manipulation and internet harassment, but every word made her look colder. Less human, less believable. The more she spoke, the more she dug her grave. Meanwhile, Diana helped us file a formal complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. It cited violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, harassment and retaliation against a minor negligent and discriminatory HOA enforcement, emotional and psychological harm. We requested compensatory damages, Karen's removal from office, and mandatory disability training for the HOA. And then we took it further. Diana coordinated with a pro bono legal network to file a temporary restraining order against Karen. Within 72 hours, a judge signed it. Karen was legally forbidden from coming within 100 feet of our property. She couldn't contact us, couldn't send letters, and couldn't step foot on the sidewalk in front of our home. The papers were delivered on a Monday morning by a uniformed deputy. It was the first time I saw Karen truly panic. She tried to act outraged in front of the deputy, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but her voice cracked. Her face flushed. Mark stood behind her, arms crossed, saying nothing. That night, the HOA board held an emergency closed meeting. The next day, the board sent out an email to the entire neighborhood. Effective immediately, Karen Whitmore is suspended from her role as HOA president pending ongoing investigations. It wasn't justice yet, but it was blood in the water. And more people started stepping forward. A neighbor 3 doors down revealed that Karen had once cited them for having a too colorful fence, even though they'd had prior approval. A military veteran shared that his PTSD support dog had been called a public safety issue by Karen. A single mom confessed that Karen had once sent her a fake citation for having excessive children's toys in the backyard. Each story added fuel to the fire. I collected them all. With Diana's guidance, I compiled a community testimony dossier. By the end of the week, we had over 23 separate accounts of Karen's harassment, abuse of power, or discriminatory behavior, many involving families with special needs, elderly relatives, or ethnic backgrounds different from Karen's own. What once felt like a lonely battle was becoming a movement. Then came the invitation from City Hall. The mayor's office wanted to meet with us privately, not just because of our case, but because the media storm had put pressure on local leadership. What happened in Willow Creek was becoming a symbol of how unchecked power in suburban HOAs could become a breeding ground for discrimination. The meeting was simple. Just me, Diana, and 2 city representatives. I told them the story, not just the dumpster incident, but everything. The first HOA letter, the sidewalk art, the fear in my daughter's eyes. When I finished, one of the city officials looked at me and said, "You're not just fighting for your daughter anymore. You're fighting for every family who's been told to make themselves smaller." Those words stayed with me, and they fueled me. That week, I joined the Disability Rights Coalition of the state. I signed on as a community advocate. I gave one public statement, a short, carefully worded video recorded in my living room with Diana beside me. In it, I said, "I'm not here to destroy a woman's life. I'm here to defend my daughter's right to exist without apology. If we let people like Karen decide who belongs in our communities, then none of our children are safe." The video went viral. Again, Karen's image had gone from strict rule follower to symbol of suburban cruelty. Her name trended for the wrong reasons. She became a meme, and not a flattering one. Her face was edited onto dumpsters, HOA flyers, even Halloween decorations. People dubbed her Dumpster Karen. And then came the final blow. A whistleblower, an HOA accountant, leaked emails showing that Karen had been pocketing funds from HOA fines. She had fraudulently inflated citations to extract extra fees from residents, especially vulnerable ones. She was arrested within a week, charged with misuse of community funds, civil harassment, and violation of state discrimination law. The headlines changed. Former HOA president faces criminal charges after viral wheelchair video. And just like that, the empire she built on fear collapsed. But for me, the real victory came at home. Because one morning, Lila asked to go outside again. Not to sit quietly, not to hide. She wanted to chalk the sidewalk again. She drew Saturn, Mars, Earth with a heart, in the middle. And then, in her now slightly steadier handwriting, she wrote, "I belong here." And for the first time in months, I breathed easily. Because she knew this was her home, too. No one could ever take that from her again. Not while I was here. It was standing room only. The HOA hearing had been moved from the usual community center conference room to the high school auditorium. A decision made after over 200 residents RSVP'd to attend. Some came out of support, others came for curiosity, a few, still loyal to Karen, came with crossed arms and skeptical eyes. But they all came, because this was no longer just a meeting. It was a reckoning. I sat near the front with Diana Reyes beside me, a briefcase full of evidence at her feet. Lila was home, safe with Mr. Bennett and Ava, coloring constellations in her notebook. She had asked me, "Will you tell them what really happened?" I promised her I would. At exactly 6 p.m., the board called the meeting to order. Todd Kingsley, now acting as interim president, cleared his throat nervously at the mic. "This hearing has been convened to review the conduct of Karen Whitmore, former HOA president, in light of recent events and formal complaints by residents." Karen sat a few rows behind me, alone. Her face was tight, her posture rigid, her once flawless hair looked brittle, like the stress had hollowed her out. Mark wasn't with her. Diana stood first. She didn't waste time. With calm, piercing precision, she laid out the timeline, from the HOA citations to the chalk art incident, from the wheelchair dragging to the leaked emails. She cited ADA statutes, local anti-discrimination ordinances, and HOA bylaws Karen had violated. She submitted community testimonies, photos, videos, financial records. Then she said, "Now, I'd like you to hear from the person this impacted most." I stood up. My hands trembled, but my voice didn't. My daughter is 9 years old. She loves space, fairy lights, and frozen waffles. She is also disabled. That doesn't make her less, it makes her different. And that difference made her a target. I turned to the crowd. Karen didn't just enforce rules. She twisted them, weaponized them. She didn't ask questions, didn't offer grace. She dragged my daughter's wheelchair to the trash like it was garbage. And in doing that, she told every child like mine that they don't belong. Silence fell over the room. Not a cough, not a whisper. I am not here for revenge. I am here because no family should be afraid to go outside. No child should feel like their medical needs make them ugly to the neighborhood. And no woman, no matter her title, should be allowed to abuse power without consequence. Karen finally stood. For a moment, it looked like she might apologize. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and said, "I was doing my job, enforcing the standards that keep this neighborhood beautiful. I admit emotions got high, but this is a smear campaign driven by social media and personal vendettas." She looked around the room for support. She found none. Then something unexpected happened. Mark Whitmore stood up. "I have something to say," he announced. Todd hesitated, then nodded. Mark walked to the mic. He cleared his throat, voice shaky. "I've stayed silent for too long, but I can't anymore." He turned to Karen. "I watched you bully that little girl. I watched you justify it. And I said nothing because I didn't want to be in the crossfire, but I can't live with myself unless I tell the truth. You cross a line, and I hope this community finally sees it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen looked like she'd been slapped. Diana stood again. "In light of Mr. Whitmore's testimony and the overwhelming documentation of misconduct, we request a formal vote for permanent removal of Karen Whitmore from all HOA duties and an immediate review of all citations issued under her leadership." Todd nodded solemnly. "All in favor?" A sea of hands rose. "All opposed?" None. Karen stood frozen as the decision was read aloud. Permanently removed, banned from future board roles, and under civil review. It was over. No applause. No drama. Just quiet, final accountability. As I walked out of the building, the air felt lighter. People stopped me, hugged me, thanked me, offered apologies they didn't know. But all I could think about was Lila. When I got home, she was asleep on the couch. Next to her was a new drawing. A picture of her in her wheelchair, with stars all around her, and a large figure beside her, a woman in a red cape holding a shield. At the bottom, she'd written in crooked letters, "My mom, the guardian of the galaxy." I smiled, because I hadn't just won a hearing. I had reclaimed our space. 3 months later, everything looked the same, and yet nothing felt the same. The street still had trimmed hedges. Lawns still sparkled with dew in the early morning. The mailboxes still stood like quiet soldiers in a perfect row. But something had shifted in the air. Neighbors no longer looked past each other. They looked at each other, spoke, paused, helped. The fear was gone. The silence was gone. The cold, tight grip that Karen had on Willow Creek had finally melted away, replaced by something real. Lila started using the porch again, at first just for a few minutes at a time, wrapped in her constellation blanket with Mr. Bennett by her side. Then longer. Then without the blanket. Then with her chalk again. Her new favorite thing was drawing signs in front of our house. One morning, I found her carefully printing in rainbow-colored chalk. Kindness is not against the rules. The new HOA board, completely restructured after Karen's removal, had even asked Lila to design the next neighborhood banner. She drew smiling families, wheelchairs and walkers, dogs and strollers. No one left out. It read, "Willow Creek welcomes you." The banner now hangs over the community park entrance. Karen's name faded quickly after the court ruled in our favor. She was ordered to pay restitution for emotional harm, banned from holding any HOA or municipal office in the future, and required to attend state-certified disability awareness training. Her house went up for sale, quietly. No one bought it for months. By the time the moving truck pulled out of her driveway, no one waved goodbye. As for us, we stayed. Not because we had to, but because we chose to. We rebuilt our life here on our terms. The ADA case inspired a larger investigation into HOA power abuse statewide. Diana testified before the state legislature about our case, and I was invited to share my experience in a short documentary about inclusion and community design. But the biggest victory? Lila's confidence returned. She now rolls proudly through the neighborhood with Ava, creating maps of planets and naming new stars after people who stood by her. She made one for me. Guardian Star shines brightest when someone is in trouble. One evening, as the sun set and golden light poured across the porch, she turned to me and said, "I'm glad we stayed. This feels like home now." I smiled and kissed the top of her head. "That's because you made it one." Sometimes a battle chooses you. Sometimes you fight not because you're brave, but because someone you love is counting on you to be. My daughter needed me to be more than her mother. She needed me to be her defender, her sword, her voice. And because of her, I found my strength. To every parent who's been told to sit down and stay quiet, stand up. To every child who's been made to feel like they take up too much space, you belong. And to every person hiding from the Karens of the world, you are not alone anymore. Because when one mother fights back, she lights a path for thousands more. If this story moved you, share it. Let the world know that no child deserves to be silenced or discarded. Let's make sure no other family has to go through what we did. Subscribe to the HOA Stories, where real people stand up, fight back, and reclaim what was always theirs: dignity,